Welcome back. Now that we've reviewed the reproductive grief course content, I'm going to talk about how perinatal loss has the unique subset of those life-limiting fetal conditions. So in the pregnancy is complicated by a life-limiting fetal condition, one of the unique things about this are the multiple losses that parents experience. There are actual losses, such as a healthy pregnancy, anticipated losses, such as the loss of becoming a parent, as well as future losses, such as future hopes and dreams. Further contributing to the distress unique to a life-limiting fetal condition is that parents must make life-altering decisions during an incredibly emotionally traumatic time of their lives. One of these decisions they have to make is whether or not to continue the pregnancy. Parents must then live with the decisions they make. While miscarriage and stillbirth may be very traumatic events for parents, the control and the decision is taken out of their hands. And so in deciding what to do with the pregnancy when the baby's not going to live, that is where this unique complication for parents is presented. Many such decisions influence not only the extent, but also the recovery of grief following perinatal loss. And all of this occurs amidst an existential crisis which these parents begin to experience. With the unique nature and multiple losses associated with a life-limiting fetal condition, parents really require expert care to address their needs from a holistic perspective, which includes that emotional, psychosocial, and spiritual needs that they have, as well as the physical needs. Now, due to the unique and uncommon needs of parents going through this type of loss, it's important to understand what these unique needs are before we can even begin meeting them as healthcare professionals. Unless you've had personal experience with this type of loss, it's unlikely that you will truly be able to intuitively understand what parents need. And there's no way that you would be able to without having experienced them. Unfortunately, most nursing courses and other courses in the healthcare profession do not address these needs in the training curriculum or even continuing education curriculum. So again, I want to thank you for taking this course so that you can prepare yourself to address the unique needs of parents along their loss journey. So let's talk a little bit more about what makes these life-limiting fetal conditions unique. Typically, life-limiting fetal conditions are diagnosed between 18 and 20 weeks gestation. This means that the parents have already begun to bond with the fetus. Likely, they've already picked out names. They've thought about future attributes and characteristics the child may have. They may have dreams of what the child will become when they grow up. They've likely already started putting together a nursery and making the preparations to bring home a child. This relationship that begins to form and this bond that has begun to form is disrupted by a life-limiting diagnosis. However, this disruption does not make the bond dissolve. I would like to illustrate this by talking about a study that I conducted with a team looking at the impact of a pregnancy complicated by anencephaly on parents. Now, in this study, we interviewed 24 individuals. 2 of those pregnancies of the parents ended in a termination. They chose to terminate the pregnancy. 1 pregnancy ended in miscarriage, and the remainder were carried to term. Now, the names that I'm going to use as I read quotes of participants are pseudonyms that have been chosen to protect the identity of those individuals. But I really think that the words that they have to say help us understand how this bond transitions. As I was interviewing the parents and reading over their transcripts, my team and I were able to see that parents actively bonded and parented their child in utero. This can be illustrated by what Dan shared. He said, "And so at this point, we were only going to be parents with our child for 9 months, and that was probably going to be it. And so those weekly appointments ended up becoming very important because that's the time we had to connect with our child." Mac shared, "You only have a certain amount of time to be parents. We were going to do the best we could during that time." And then Christiana told me, They said it wasn't worth putting my life in danger, but that's not what it was for me. For me, it was giving my daughter as much life as possible. As parents actively parented their child, they made memories and became very intentional about carrying out activities with their child in utero that they would have done had their child survived. Some of these activities included going on a special vacation, maybe going to the beach. One family fed the ducks at the park. Others would bake cookies. Some families went to see children's films in theaters. There were multiple things that the parents did to actively parent and make those memories with the time that they had with their child in utero. So it's important to remember that this time, this bond, it transitions with the diagnosis. It does not dissolve as one might expect. Following the completion of the pregnancy, many of the parents struggled with the complex emotions that they continued to experience for sometimes decades after their loss. These emotions were commonly guilt, anger, and unfairness. Social triggers were also very common, such as seeing a healthy baby in a grocery store, a restaurant, or a church service. And many parents began to rearrange their life in order to refrain becoming emotionally triggered. Milestones were very important and continue to be very important to parents, such as birthdays or holidays. Many parents continued to celebrate their child's birthday. I know in May we celebrated my niece's what would have been 4th birthday together. While parents continue to remember these milestones, they are commonly forgot by others, and parents tend to celebrate these moments alone. Parents also spoke of the importance of symbolism, and many chose a specific symbol such as a rainbow or a butterfly, or in my family's case, a poppy, to memorialize the baby that they lost. And these symbols can be helpful to continue that bond and to help that relationship transition as time goes on. And remember, Warden's task talked about finding an enduring connection with the deceased, and many people found that symbol as a way to continue to connect with their deceased child. In the study I've been talking about, and many others, an overwhelming silence tends to shroud the perinatal loss experience. Unfortunately, this silence tends to transition into stigma. Because this loss is so silent and parents are not often given permission to talk about their loss, society begins to form expectations of what is appropriate or should be appropriate for a parent experiencing this type of loss. One of those assumptions on this behavioral expectation is what is considered to be an acceptable time frame of grief. Society commonly expects parents' grief to resolve with the completion of the pregnancy. However, parents are not having their grief resolved with the end of their pregnancy, and I feel Michael illustrated this very clearly when he shared with me. Everyone expects it to be like a book, with a beginning and an end. And all of a sudden you're done dealing with your sadness and your grief and all that. But it's not really, at least not in my experience. Christiana shared, I felt like I was expected to go on as if nothing had happened. I started sleeping a lot. It became too hard to face the day. Sophia shared, when everybody went home and everything, that's when the true hell began. It was probably 4 years of complete hell for me and my husband. Perinatal loss has become increasingly recognized as a traumatic experience, with up to 44% of those carrying the pregnancy experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Now, trauma is an emotional response to a shocking situation that overwhelms one's ability to cope with the emotions they're experiencing. Traumatic events include natural disasters, war, violence, and loss. Individuals who struggle to find constructive ways to manage their emotion following their experience often experience those symptoms of post-traumatic stress, such as depression, anxiety, suicidality, sleep disturbance, and susceptibility to illness. Unfortunately, many studies and clinical interventions do not consider PTSD or symptoms of PTSD as they discuss perinatal loss. Parents with an intrauterine diagnosis of a life-limiting fetal condition who commonly experience a subsequent existential crisis are especially susceptible to symptoms of PTSD. In the study I've been sharing with you, there have been many examples of parents describing emotional trauma and symptoms of PTSD. Here are a few examples that parents shared with me. Delia said, "Honestly, even 10 years later, there's days when I have to tell myself to get out of bed. You have to keep living. You have to keep going. Because there's still days when I think that it isn't right to be alive when your baby is not." Mary shared, "I'm looking at my calendar on my wall right now. That is August 2013. I still cannot bring myself to bring the calendar off the wall. I glance at it every day. I don't know that I look at it every day, but I know that it's there." Rebecca shares, "I was in a state of traumatic stress or something for about a year after he died. I remember very little after that year. I know I was there because of the pictures, but I don't remember any of it." And Dan shared with me, "You can't see your son be born brain first and not have some sort of PTSD after that." When a life-limiting fetal condition is diagnosed, the goals of pregnancy must be revised. The original goals of a healthy pregnancy, obviously, are the health of the mother and the fetus. However, when the fetus is no longer going to survive, those goals don't make any more sense. In a study looking at continued pregnancies following a life-limiting fetal diagnosis, the researchers found that there's an overall goal that develops following that diagnosis, and that's to have no regrets. So parents then live their life in a way to have no regrets in the decisions that they make. Studies have shown that the transition from non-parent to parent and the identity that follows is a critical milestone in the development of humans. Pregnancies complicated by a life-limiting fetal condition disrupt this development of identity as a parent. This has both individual and social implications, particularly because ambiguity abounds as to whether or not one can consider themselves a parent if they do not have a living child. This is especially true for first-time parents. In Amy's interview, she shared with me, "It's always hard to know the answer to the question, 'Do you have any kids?' What am I supposed to say? I do or I did?" This critical transition into parenthood is disrupted, and an identity crisis emerges from this. So considering the deep psychosocial implications underlying a life-limiting fetal condition, the transition and identity of parenthood must also be considered. The revised tasks of pregnancy, as you can see on the model of the slide, describe the developmental tasks parents must accomplish in order to achieve their overall goal of having no regrets, particularly following a life-limiting fetal diagnosis. Using Rubin's tasks of pregnancy as a framework, Cote Arsenault and Denny Kolsch developed these revised tasks of pregnancy to explain the critical developmental tasks that parents must achieve in order to accomplish their overall goal of having no regrets. Unlike tasks or stages of grief, the developmental tasks of pregnancy are chronological and sequential, meaning that they must happen in a particular order in order for the parents to achieve their overall goal. According to this model, parents go through 5 stages following a life-limiting fetal diagnosis. The first stage is pre-diagnosis. To the knowledge of the parents, their pregnancy is healthy, and so they live their life accordingly. In the second stage, parents learn of that life-limiting fetal diagnosis. They must then make decisions about their pregnancy, such as whether to continue or terminate. They must live with these decisions they make, and they must learn how to tell those around them about not only their pregnancy, but their decisions regarding their pregnancy. Unfortunately, many relationships that parents have change once this news is shared with others. This could be because people don't agree with their decisions. It could be because perinatal loss makes them uncomfortable. But whatever the reason, parents must then learn how to deal with these changing social interactions of those near them. Comprehending the diagnosis is also important for parents to be able to make a decision in their pregnancy. As parents learn to live with their decision, they must attempt to make the most of their time with their baby. And this is that active parenting that we talked about earlier. As time continues, parents then must prepare for the future, which includes birth and the ultimate death. So while parents prepare to give birth to their baby, they tend to be simultaneously preparing for a funeral. After the birth and death of the child, parents must then learn how to adjust to the world without their baby, as well as learn how to live in this new reality with the decisions they've made. Healthcare professionals are ideally placed to help parents accomplish their overall goal of having no regrets following a life-limiting fetal diagnosis. It's important to assess and reassess parents' needs, their current needs, their future needs, their physical, psychosocial, emotional, and their spiritual needs. Clinicians can provide support and offer resources based on these needs, which is why it's important to not only assess but reassess, because parents' needs will change as the time moves forward in their pregnancy. After the death of the baby, parents will also need to learn how to adjust to that life without baby, and healthcare clinicians can be very instrumental in helping with that transition process and adjusting to that world without the deceased. So it's very important to keep in mind that these parents need to live with the decisions that they make. And healthcare professionals can really be instrumental in helping parents make decisions that are consistent with their values, beliefs, and needs. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about how we can incorporate different things to help that decision-making process. Some of the things that parents can help when preparing for the birth include talking about different ceremonies or rituals that parents might want to incorporate. They can talk about making memories with the baby and being intentional with their time. They can offer things like maybe making hand and footprints at the birth, or maybe having a photographer present, or maybe a videographer. Something to capture this precious time that they still have with their child. Up next, we're going to take a deeper look into the conceptual frameworks that are going to help us understand more deeply what parents are going through as they experience perinatal loss related to a life-limiting fetal condition.